Welcome to the next iteration of the Prolific Super Producer Podcast. My name is Tyson. With me, I have Nathan, and we're going to be talking about authenticity in music today. So how to be authentic with your music, how to increase the loyalty of your fan base by being authentic, but also the dark side of authenticity, how to not be authentic, and also how authenticity is one of the most misunderstood concepts inside of music today. But before we really dive into that, we need to discuss what is authenticity? What is authenticity in music? So Nathan, do you want to answer that question for us?
Yeah, totally. Let's get into it. Okay, so authenticity. This is kind of one of those buzzwords in the music, or, the music industry, like this whole artistry thing. I think even creatives in general, just like if you're into film, photography, art, drawing, anything like that. Like, to be authentic is something is admirable. To be authentic is like if you say, "Oh, that's authentic," or you say, "Oh, that sounds so real," or "It's just so raw." Like I think they're all kind of synonyms for the same thing. And the word authentic is a compliment. It's like it's held in high esteem in the creative world and the creative things. And so I kind of think it's important to start with what is authenticity, and then kind of how to use it. And where does it rear its head when it comes to, especially with making songs, like writing lyrics, and then, we think there's a way authenticity can help you, and there's ways it can backfire, but it all starts from, I think, just defining it first. So what is authenticity? Is it fully knowing someone or something, or is it knowing a part of someone or something? Right? Like, I think that this is kind of like at the crux of both of these, right? A lot of people will say, authenticity is like knowing someone, like all of everything. But the reality is, when it comes to songs and song making, a song can feel really authentic. A song can feel real because it can be a moment of an artist, but the song itself doesn't reveal anything and everything about an artist. So I think it's just important to kind of establish, like, authenticity can take many different shapes and forms. And I think, Tyson, you had when we were prepping for this episode, you had a really good metaphor that I had not heard in a long time. Like, I remembered it, but I did not, I just hadn't heard it in a while. And I think it's so appropriate for this authenticity discussion. It was like the elephant metaphor.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, what's up with that?
So back in, way in like 300 BC or something, India had this old parable, and it was basically there was a group of blind men, and they wanted to understand what an elephant was. So they, have somebody bring up an elephant to them, and they all start walking up to the elephant, and they start grabbing random parts of the elephant. So one person grabs its trunk and, says, "Oh, an elephant is, like a branch." And then another guy, leans up against the side of it, and he's like, "Oh, an elephant is like a wall." And then another guy grabs the tail, and he's like, "Oh, an elephant is like a rope." And so they all are touching parts of this elephant, right? And they understand a very small aspect of what an elephant could potentially be like, when in reality it has, the body of a wall and the tail of a rope and, all this other stuff. So that's the concept, though, that really, as humans, like, we can never truly understand and know another human, even somebody as close, like a partner, a spouse. Like, we can't actually know them fully because we're not with them 24/7. So we can't truly know anybody but our own self. And it's like even exaggerated with music, because you're trying to communicate something about yourself through your music, but you can only get a very minuscule amount of that self put into that song to then share with others, right? Mm-hmm. Even when we're writing music, like, oftentimes one of the biggest mistakes we do is try to fit too much into a song, whereas a song really needs just one central concept, and then everything else should support that central concept. We've talked about that in the past episodes of, like, how to write songs that, are engaging and compelling. It's usually because, and when a song is not compelling, it's usually because there's too many concepts and we don't know what is going on lyrically.
All of that being said, to go forward, right? Authenticity is kind of that, it is that intangible kind of component that makes that I think makes an artist an artist. I do think that there's a part of that there, right? Because we all know the artists that are trying to be like somebody else or trying to be someone they're not, and then it's so easy to sniff out something that feels inauthentic. Like that's easy, right? Like we can tell as humans, we just have a good gut reaction to be like, something's a little off about that. Oh, I don't really believe that. So authenticity is something, that can work in your favor if you can use it appropriately. And I think that a big stumbling block where authenticity can kind of backfire on you a little bit is when it comes to songwriting, like the actual writing of the songs, in particular, lyrics. And like in my world and the people I'm talking with, week in and week out, lyrics are a big thing. Melodies are a big thing. Storytelling is a big thing. And more often than not, if I'm talking with someone and they're aspiring to write maybe their first song or their first handful of songs and they feel like the lyrics are hard, as I dig deeper, I'm realizing, it's hard because you're not talking like you. You're not sounding like yourself. You're like being overly, being overly authentic, right? Like can hamstring your writing. You're thinking too hard about it. It's like you can go both ways. You can try to sound like somebody else, and then you can also just try to be overly authentic in the sense that like you're really trying to force something. And so like, music by definition is this kind of like Tyson said, it's this like a poetic, artistic expression, right? And it's kind of like it can be difficult because you can feel like as a young songwriter that you need to sound like a songwriter. So there's this thing called songwriter talk that I am just like vehemently against. Like I'm trying to save people from this songwriter talk because I fell for it so many times. And songwriter talk is like, it's when you stop sounding like yourself and you're trying to sound like what you think a good songwriter would sound like. So you start rhyming all of a sudden every line or every other line because you think that's what a good songwriter does. Or you put similes and metaphors and imagery all over the freaking place because you think that's what a good songwriter does, right? And so in that process of trying to sound like a good songwriter or sound like someone else, you end up kind of like capping, you end up kind of taking away your ability to sound like yourself, right? And so something that we probably like about our favorite artists is that they sound like themselves, like they're just communicating in a way that they would communicate. So when it comes to authenticity and writing lyrics, the best advice that I have is to just say it how you would say it. Trust your own vocabulary. And at its best, right, a song can be a little bit more of a dramatic expression of an everyday thing, but don't start reaching for all this songwriter stuff to justify like, oh, this is how I'm being, like, this is a really good song, this is how I'm being authentic. Because right, optimizing your song for humans is going to be a lot better than trying to optimize your song for songwriters. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I'm seeing right now. Tyson, I don't know, like, especially because you're in the artist development world too. And if you're working with artists who are, maybe they're younger or they're kind of starting and they're working on their songs, I'm sure authenticity is kind of a big thing that you're looking for. And it can be easy to sniff out when someone's just they're trying too hard or they're not saying things how they would actually say them because you know the artist and you're like, why don't you just talk like that in your song? They're like, oh, but I need to make sure it rhymes and all this. It's like, have you ever had any of those kind of conversations? I'd be super curious to hear about that.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess one caveat. So just to, cards on the table here. I am not the primary songwriter inside of our music management agency. So I can kind of like speak high level to this, but I'm not, the expert here in songwriting. But the one part that I do have a lot of, credibility in, I would say, is I think that melody will always trump your lyrics anyway. Mm-hmm. And I say that because the melody, right, is the kind of the catchy part that everybody really latches onto. It's like when you're trying to think of the name of a song and you're trying to tell your buddy, you go like, oh, it's like this song, and you like sing the melody, right? You don't say the lyrics, you sing the melody because that's what sticks into your head. So that's just inherently melody will always trump the lyrics. And I say that to basically free you of your lyrics may not matter as much as you think. They are important, don't get me wrong, but they're not as important as the melody. So the melody should always be the king in your songwriting, and then the lyrics should come afterwards. Not necessarily in like songwriting process, but in order of importance. So if you're trying to, try to change your melody to fit this like really cool lyric that you have that you think is a, gonna blow all the songwriters away, like that's where you're gonna run into trouble, because you're being inauthentic with your melody by changing your melody to fit your lyrics. And the other thing the other caveat here is that this takes some self-awareness. If you are trying to not take any inspiration from others and not take any best practices when it comes to songwriting, you never want to rhyme. Like, those are kind of red flags to me. Of you're probably haven't reached the point where you can kind of ignore the rules. It's kind of like music theory. Most people learn music theory from a young age if they're like, into music. And then when you get a little bit older and more experienced with your instrument, you can kind of then ignore the music theory and just play whatever you want, and you can break the rules. And it's a very similar, process with songwriting. And I say all of this. So, right, you learn the rules. You have to kind of be, I would say, border on inauthentic when you try to learn how to write songs. And then once you find, your groove inside of your songwriting, then you can start to break the rules. You can then express yourself truly the way that you want to once you're more experienced. I would caution, though, if you're just starting to write, don't try to be overly authentic. Like Nathan was saying, don't try to just automatically like go into this mode of every single lyric needs to like break my soul.
That's
like,
it, man.
That's not helpful, but then it's also not helpful to just copy what all the best practices are of what other people say to do. 100%. Well, I think you should pay attention to them. Don't make either one of those camps your whole world of songwriting.
Well, I'll say out loud, like, that was me. Like, that I was the person that would bleed over lyrics, and I couldn't put down a lyric, or I'd rework it 100 times until it felt like, this is so me, so right now. You know what I mean? Like, and that can be a hindrance. It's like in the pursuit of authenticity, which is cool, which is good. Like, be authentic. It's like you're overworking it. It's like you're overworking it so much where it's like, in reality, you can be authentic and not have to spend a lot of time on your lyrics, or not a lot of time. Like, those don't have to be synonymous. Like, a long length of time bleeding over everything means it's real. It's like, honestly, I could probably sit here and write a song about the weather outside and how it's snowing, and then the snow didn't stick and it's making me miss summer. Like, isn't that real? Like, that's real. That's how I'm feeling. That's what I'm thinking right now. And that was like 5 seconds.
I think that song was already taken, but...
Oh, right. I'll think of a more creative way. I'll be more real. I'll be more real with it. But man, what do you think about like authenticity? Like, okay, so we kind of like just dunked on authenticity for a little bit there. And so like, not that like we're totally against it or anything. Like, it's totally good. It can like actually really, really help you. And we want you to be authentic. I think like if you're able to be authentic, if it's something you can really feel, it's going to come across as more natural, which is kind of like in the name of being authentic. But it can help you if you are performing lyrics that you believe in, if you're performing a song that you believe in, right? Like, believing in what you're writing and feeling like it's really a representation of you and where you're at right now. Like, that can enhance the overall performance. Like, I find that vocal recordings go quicker when I'm singing about something that I actually believe in. And like, as someone who like, I've written a lot of songs for other people based off specific breakdowns, and having to use pretty stringent kind of boundaries of, need it to be this BPM, this kind of singing. It needs to be a love song, but it can't be too sappy. And it can't include these 3 words. And it's like, it can be really restrictive. The more restriction there is there for me trying to perform that and sound real and like do justice to the project, it's a lot harder. It really is, because it's like, it feels a little manufactured because it is, right? Like, it didn't come from inside here. It's coming from some external source. And it's a lot harder, I think, to get a good, even just vocal performance, to get like super tactical. Like, it's hard to just perform your vocals really well, right? If you're not really into what you're singing. So I don't know, like, if you have any thoughts about that, Tyson, or if any artists you guys are working with or anything like that, like, I think that's a whole thing. Like, being real, being authentic is a superpower, because it helps you perform your song better. It helps you, which could even help you connect with other people better, because then they're really resonating with what you're saying because you're really feeling it,
Yeah, 100%. And there's actually a great example. So we're working with one artist who, his background is all in like worship music. So he was a worship pastor, and he wanted to start his artist project. And so he was just like working on, his own music, trying to figure out like, okay, like where is my lane essentially genre wise, like overall sound. And so we've basically done everything with him we've done, straight up, like CCM, so contemporary Christian music. We've done like more hard rock stuff. We've done some like lo-fi. We've done some just like straight up pop. Like we've kind of run the gamut of like all these various things that we could potentially do with each of his songs. Nice. And trying to figure out, just like what will stick. And this is still like, we were still trying to like figure out our own processes as well. So he was, we were all trying our best, but just nothing was really working. And then we eventually kind of figured out that half the reason why none of these songs were sticking was that he didn't really think his songs were that good inherently. Like the songs weren't written well. And because they weren't written well, they came across as just like a little bit, cheesy for lack of a better term. And so like he didn't truly believe what he was saying, and therefore couldn't actually put his like heart and soul into the performance. And so everything just sounded flat, and it had nothing to do with the production. It just, it was only with his vocal performance. And then, as a side note, we also kind of figured out that he actually had a really good country voice. And so
how fun,
but he hated country.
Oh man.
So we, as of right now, like we're leaning in a different direction with him. We haven't actually released any music underneath like his new, genre style here, but as of recording this, at least he's probably out, by the time this airs, but we're basically, going this direction of producing more like kind of pop music, but with a country flair to fit his voice better. So it could just be the genre that you're actually working in, and it just doesn't really fit your voice correctly. But I think there was a huge amount of this of like his songs just weren't sticking very well because he didn't truly believe what he was saying. And so that kind of like ties back to this conversation of authenticity. Is like, if you don't truly believe the lyrics, if you don't truly believe what you're saying is real or true, then your performance will suffer and nobody will connect with that. Because, you can, as Nathan already mentioned, you can sniff out inauthenticity a mile away nowadays, right? You can watch one YouTube video and say, he doesn't have it. And just, you're gone. You're never going to come back to that, creator or whatever. But I think it's super powerful to intentionally write lyrics that you can be behind, you can get behind. And if you don't, then nobody's going to connect with that. So that is the power of authenticity. And we've kind of been dancing around this kind of point, but I want to bring it home for everybody, is that authenticity is true, but it is not complete. And so what I mean by that is that you can truly capture one moment, one feeling, one emotion in a song, but you can't capture all of the emotions, all of the feelings in one song. You have to write different songs for those ones. So inherently, people will never know you completely through your music, but they can completely know part of you. So I hope that makes sense in terms of how we are approaching authenticity. And so basically the rule is don't try to fit everything in one song. That's rule number one. And then rule number two is don't fib. Just don't lie. Don't lie in your songs. Don't say you're feeling a way when you're really not.
100%. And so I think that's like, that puts an awesome bow on top of like the songwriting process in the trenches kind of like stage of all this. I'd love it, like, especially in your world too, Tyson, to shift the conversation a little bit towards like the branding side, like your image, and like, because there's also that too. There's the music and how, we can get a raw reaction from a song or feel really connected because we felt like a track was authentic. But then there's also, you know, the infatuation with the artist itself. So this, I guess, is really speaking to like people who are, you know, pursuing artistry, like to be a public artist in some way. But like this is, I feel like it's even more of a conversation, right? Because like it's one thing to believe in the lyrics you're doing and make a song that sounds legit and feels real to you and all that kind of stuff that resonates with people. But then it's also like how you were saying, you don't have to put everything into a song for it to be authentic. Like, I kind of think it's the same way with like your image. And if you are in the social media game in the world of things, right? Like authenticity can kind of backfire. Like it was an example that like we were talking about, you know, was like, you don't have to, again, bear everything about your life on social media or something like that to feel like you're an authentic artist, right? Like if you have a fight with your spouse, you're you know, you don't need to talk about it on social media, even though it's authentic, right? This is what we talked about. Like it's real. It happened. This happened, but you're not going to go to social media and like, you know, kind of like shame your spouse or whatever and like bring that internal marital problem into the public eye. Like that's just whack. You know what I mean? So sharing true
unless
things.
you want a divorce.
Unless you, yeah, sure. But you know what I mean? Like I feel like there's definitely a conversation for authenticity of how to show up as an artist where you might feel like, oh, people need to know me. People need to know me. And I think to an extent they do. But it's like you can share true things, same thing, like with the songs, you don't need to put everything. Like you don't need to put everything in there to be authentic, which I think is kind of the crux of this conversation, right? Like you just don't have to be, you can be authentic and if it's not 100% thing, because none of us know all of our favorite artists 100%. We just don't. We'd probably be surprised at some of the things we find out about our favorite artists because they're just another human being. They're another person. They've got a story. They've got a background. They've got all kinds of other life stuff, you know? So I would love if you would talk a little bit about like branding and stuff and what you do with artists and how do you approach an artist with their social media game and being public with this whole authenticity thing. Like there's probably a few pointers that I think would just be really helpful.
Yeah. So brand is one of the hardest things to understand as an artist or helping manage artists, right? Brand is probably the most misunderstood concept in music and even elsewhere, right? So we can use the semi-recent example now of Bud Light, right? They sent a custom Bud Light can to a trans influencer, and all of a sudden, everybody knows the story. Everybody then hated Bud Light. Their core, you know, customer base decided that Bud Light was, you know, next to the devil, and then, you know, boycotted all of Bud Light because obviously that was inauthentic to their brand. Whether or not that was like a moral or ethical move or not, like I don't care honestly. At that level of branding, but you have to understand it's like that's the danger of how authenticity can backfire against you if you have developed a certain brand and then you go directly against that brand. The people who were over here who loved you now hate you. And also the people who, you know, you're now appealing to because you said something else, they don't trust you because you were saying something else before. So if you're going like back and forth on these issues, you're never going to build a fan base that then will actually support you long term. And that's not to say that you can't change over time because like we're all human. To be human is to change. And so if we are, you know, say we're standing, let's just use politics for an example because it's easy, right? Say I'm a hardcore Democrat today, and 5 years from now, I'm a hardcore Republican. And that change, though, could be authentic. But what you have to do is you have to slowly move yourself from the Democratic, you know, platform or whatever, talking about democratic things, slowly over to the Republican platform and things. So a brand, in essence, is two things. I like to break it down to two things. A brand is, first of all, it's something unknown associated with something known. So, for example, if you don't know me, I can talk about things on social media that then you associate me with. For example, I talk about music a lot. I talk about mixing, I talk about mastering, and I talk about songwriting, and I talk about music marketing. I talk about all those things on this podcast. So now your perception of me is then tied to those things that you are already aware of. Another example is like, my tattoos. So if you are watching this on YouTube, like you can see, I have a tattoo of Squirtle on my arm. That would indicate that I like Pokemon. And if I talk about Pokemon a lot on my social media, you would then associate me as Tyson, the brand, with Pokemon and music. And I could then talk about, some other thing that I, enjoy or am passionate about. For example, my studio is called Dinosaur Dog Studio, or Dinosaur Dog Mastering is my mastering studio. And that is from my dog. His name is Perseus. And I like, talking about my pets because I like my pets. And so that's another thing that I could then talk about. And then you would associate me with my giant black lab. He's actually there. You can't see him though, because he's so dark. He blends in with the carpet.
He's camo mode, yeah.
Anyway, but that's essentially how a brand is built. So that's the first part, is something unknown. So you associated with something they do know, which is, anything else in your life, interests, things like that. And a quick note on that is that they don't have to agree with, your fans don't have to agree with, or, be into all the same things as you are. There just has to be some overlap. So, for example, in my brand, so I talk about, say, Perseus, I talk about music, and I talk about Pokemon. If you like, dogs and music, but you don't care about Pokemon, you still might follow me and, be bought into my brand. But if you only like music and you don't like pets or Pokemon, then you may not be as likely to follow me. But if you like all three of those, then you're probably going to be really bought in, because you're like, oh, this guy likes all the same stuff I do, because there's that connection, that, relation. Or if you don't like, any of those things, obviously you're not going to follow me at all. And even amongst those separate categories, like there are stances that I take, like I don't believe that gear makes better music. So if you do believe that gear makes better music, then you're probably not going to follow me as closely. You're not going to be as bought into my brand. So again, this goes really deep, but moving on before I take up too much airtime here. The second thing that brand is the things that people say about you behind your back to other people. So if somebody meets you and then they, go have coffee with somebody else and they say, oh yeah, like I met that Tyson guy. What they say about you in that moment is your brand. And so some companies, for example, I don't have a good example actually, but some companies will think and try to say they have a certain brand, but in reality, people say something completely different behind their back. Yeah. And that is ultimately your true brand, despite whatever you're trying to market yourself as. So just recognize that there can be a misalignment of what you think you are and what you actually are. So just like, I guess, keeping in mind of those are the two ways, or the two things that brand is, and then also how to build one is really associating yourself with things that people also like. This is why also a collaboration can be one of the best things that you could ever do for your music brand. If you want to be associated with the top echelon of your brand, if you get to do a collaborative project with them, that can mean the world to you as an artist and your career. Because let's say that my dream, we talk about One Republic a lot, so let's just use that as an example. Say if I get to do a collaborative project with One Republic or even Ryan Tedder, I'll take it.
Yeah, sure.
If I get to do,
why not?
yeah. So if I get to release a song collaboratively with Ryan Tedder, all of a sudden that changes people's view in their mind about me. They say, oh, now Tyson is all of a sudden a really big deal because he did this single with Ryan Tedder, and Ryan Tedder is a big deal. So therefore Tyson is a big deal. So that is like, ultimately, again, that back to the first definition, something unknown to something known. So you didn't know who I was, but now all of a sudden I did something with somebody who matters, or, in your mind matters. And then all of a sudden I am brought up like 10 levels in your mind because all of a sudden I must be interesting. But the reality is I just paid Ryan Tedder $1 million to do a song with me. I didn't actually, earn that, but it doesn't matter because all of a sudden I am associated in your mind with Ryan Tedder. So hopefully that was somewhat helpful. Nathan, you can either break that down or add something to that if you want.
No, I think you nailed it, man. I think that was awesome. And I think that the big thing to take away too is I feel like that's just helpful. Like, because maybe part of the hesitation in people wanting to go the independent artist route or go the artist route in general, whether that means with a label or not, just like that mean going public with your music, and that's you're out there, right? It can be part of the holdup and hesitation could be, oh man, I have to put everything out there, because that's what you hear a lot. Because the sage advice out there is like, be yourself, just be you, just like all that, put yourself out there, that kind of stuff. And like I think it's helpful to hear that doesn't mean anything and everything. That doesn't mean now that you don't have a life, because I think the key is not confusing you for your artist self, right? Like to separate your career from your personal life, and that's healthy, and then that's really good. And that doesn't mean that there aren't things in your personal life that you can talk about, that you can share, but I think it's helpful to hear, hey, maybe it's just picking a few pillars, a few things, right? To help connect what's unknown to what's known, like you were talking about. And that doesn't mean you're, needing to do consistent selfies with you, your wife, your children, of what you're doing, of you at the grocery store, and here's the kind of milk that I buy, and this is my favorite cereal. You don't have to go. It doesn't have to be like that. So I think that that's really helpful for people to hear, because I do think there's a lot of misconceptions out there because that's honestly the kind of content that we see a whole bunch of. People posting selfies, people doing anything and everything. They're like sharing anything and everything. And I feel like a lot of those people are on the road to burnout. You know what I mean? Because there should be a separation. There should be a healthy separation between you and your artist self. And like, okay, I kind of curious to hear your thoughts about this, Tyson. And if you're listening, I'm curious to hear how, if you're like, to see where you lean. So talking about like art and the artist, right? Separating both of those things. Do you think, Tyson, can you separate the art from the artist? Let me like just give an example. So for me, I'm someone who can't. Like, if I hear a song by an artist and I'm like, oh, this song is so good, I really like this, and then I find out that artist is really just a bad person, I will not listen to the song. I'll take it off my playlist. I won't add it, and I won't go down their catalog ever again. Like, that's just kind of how I am. My wife is someone who's on the other spectrum. She's awesome. She just loves music for the song. She can listen to the song on its own accord and can hear a whole bunch of bad things about the artist that wrote it, and she can be like, I don't care. I'm not listening. She's almost in a way, I'm listening to this for the song, not for the artist, if that makes any sense. I'm in support of this track, not the artist. So I'm curious, like, if you're listening, have you ever thought about that as a fellow creative too? Tyson, would be curious to hear, can you separate the art from the artist? Like, where are you at in all that?
Yeah, I think that you can. I think that even though you don't think
Teach
you can,
me.
I think you can. So
Teach me.
In real life here, as we're recording this podcast, I know this is going to be kind of a delayed example because this is going to be like May when this episode airs, but I want to talk about a Christmas song, and what is it? I think it's "O Come, O Come, Emmanuel." It is the oldest Christmas song that we currently have in our, modern day American repertoire.
Okay.
Do you know who wrote that song?
I actually don't. I don't know.
Do you care?
Oh, I guess not. No, I've never thought. Yeah, I've never thought about the artist.
So I think that, just because, granted, if I hear a song and I like know that this, person is doing terrible things or, or I don't know, like, my wife really loves, football or soccer she watches the Premier League.
Okay. Yeah.
And so she will like pick a favorite player, and she's like, oh, I love this player. Like, he's such a good guy. And then all of a sudden you realize like he got convicted for, rape or something or, battery or assault. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, I don't really like this person anymore.
Yes,
I don't like them as a player. And so this has happened multiple times. It's not just like one time. It's unfortunate.
It's sad.
And the reality is, like, they had a good brand because they were a good, footballer, and they were they were philanthropic or something like that. And then all of a sudden they do one thing that just completely blows their brand out of the water, destroys their reputation. So that is like an example of, basically coloring your legacy of, your brand. But I also think that when you write a song, it will outlive you. Potentially, if it's a good enough song, it's going to outlive you, and people forget who actually was the person who wrote it, and they just appreciate the art in and of itself. And I think that is the ultimate goal of most songs, because you want your song to be personal and intimate, like to you, and when you want it to mean something to you, but inherently somebody else listening to that song is going to filter it through their own lens of their own life experience and their own experience and their own just, feelings about the song. And they're going to have a different meaning for that song than you do. So if you think about your favorite song growing up in, let's just say, high school, like that song meant something different to you than it did to the artist, almost definitively. And so I think you actually brought it up on an early episode of our podcast, which was in the song Demons by, who was it?
Oh, Imagine Dragons, right?
Imagine Dragons. Yeah. So Demons by Imagine Dragons. They have a music video that actually displays this of, they have the band playing on stage, and then they like zoom into different audience members, and they like you watch their experience with the song of like the demons that they're facing in their own life. And it was different for every single person. That's exactly the way that we interact with music, is that I am going to inherently filter any music I hear through my own experience, not the artist's experience. And so while I think that if I hear a song and I know the artist is a terrible person, it's going to color it a little bit.
Sure.
But ultimately, I don't care, because that's not what I'm focused on. Some people focus on the brand overall, like the artist, like Taylor Swift is a great example. Most people focus on Taylor Swift, the person, more than they do the music.
That's true.
Versus I like to listen to the music for the music and not the artist necessarily. Most of my favorite bands, I don't want to know anything about them, because the bands that I have learned something about, I generally don't like them.
It's like I knew too much.
Granted, there was actually one band that I had the opportunity. So I listened to them in high school, and I was like really into them. And then I actually got the opportunity to play with them. And this is where, the age-old concept, like never meet your heroes, comes in.
Oh no.
And so my band opened for them. The band was The Classic Crime. So awesome. Early 2000s.
Okay. All right.
2000s rock.
Let's go.
And I like their music is good, but honestly, they were like kind of jerks in real life. And so like after that moment, like I've not listened to their music since. And so I think that was like such a personal experience that I then, the music is colored for me. I'm not going to listen to it because of that. So there are instances where I think that is true, but I also intentionally don't learn a lot about artists, because I don't want the artist to ruin the music for me when it means something to me, and I don't really care what the artist thinks about it necessarily. So that was kind of a long-winded response to your question. But I think it's a lot more nuanced than like, can you separate the art from the artist? Sometimes, and other times no, based on how intimate that experience is and how like truly like what the artist has truly done to offend you. If it's
true.
Super personal and something you really care about, then it probably will. But it may not always.
That's really good. And I'm thinking, as I'm literally thinking about this right now, I'm like, okay, I'm thinking of different artists that I actually can do this with, because like you said, it probably is situation dependent, because even as like a fellow creative, if you're listening, I'm sure you have a different set of ears, right? And so when you're listening to a song, sometimes it can be for enjoyment, but a lot of times maybe you're kind of even subconsciously analyzing what's going on sonically and melodically and lyrically and all this kind of stuff in a track. And I'm thinking about, okay, like there's an artist that I'll just publicly put it out there. People can say whatever they want, but there's an artist called The Dream, and he's actually like a really big songwriter and record producer for like big artists, like Rihanna, Beyonce, all that kind of stuff. But his artist project, I will listen to not because I enjoy him as the artist, like what he's talking about, because lyrically his pillars, his themes are pretty like sensual and stuff, and I'm just that's not the kind of music I just naturally gravitate towards, right? But I listen to his songs to get inspired because he has a wicked way of producing and blending sounds, such unique melodies and stuff. So I will. I think that's a good example of why it's situation dependent, because I'll listen to him not because I'm a big fan of him as an artist and what he's always talking about in his songs. I could kind of care less, but I'm listening because I respect how he's crafting things as a fellow, songmaker and stuff. So that's a really good conversation. I'm glad that we talked about that.
Yeah, I think that there's a huge amount of like differences of how we view music, because when you first, when you don't know anything about music production, you just listen to the song, you listen to the melody, you listen to maybe the lyrics, and, overall just like the vibe. And you're like, right. This is like energetic, this is not energetic, this is chill, this is not chill. Those are the types of like words and concepts we think about. But then once we learn more about production, then we start listening to way more aspects of the song. So we can still listen to the, melody, lyrics, overall vibe, but now we're like diving into like the specifics of like, what's the snare tone of like what that you're using, or like, that's an interesting choice in like guitar tone, or like that saw synth doesn't sound right here. There's like random things that we think about, and then we learn. So that's just production. Then we learn mixing, and then we're like, oh, like that bass guitar is like way too muddy. Like they should have added some more 2K to that. And then one layer more. Then we talk about mastering, and then we're like, oh man, this master was like way crushed. Like there's so many like limiting artifacts in this thing. It's like ridiculous.
Yes,
like we just get like way too like philosophical about like our views in music. And truly there are some songs that I liked when I was younger, and I can't listen to them anymore because the master is bad,
because it's so bad.
So one artist in particular, House of Heroes, they have a song called Buckets for Bullet Wounds, and I loved that song when I was a teenager. And I can't listen to it anymore because I listen to it, I'm like, this song is so crushed. It's like limited. It's like, I think I threw it in my DAW at one point, and it's at like -5 LUFS or something, or -4 LUFS. It's just like so crushed.
Loud. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like for context, if you don't know, like the standard is usually around like -9 or -8 LUFS is usually as loud as people go. Sometimes a little louder if it's like a really aggressive song, but -5 is just ridiculous, and that was at the height of the loudness wars. And so anyway, all that being said, you get to experience additional layers of music as you learn more about it. And so like, and I don't know a ton of theory, so I'm not like on that side of things, but I know there's people who are like thinking about like chord structures and like why'd they throw the 13th in there, like I don't know why.
So listen to that, Mark, it's a diminished 13th, but
exactly. And so like there's just all these different layers that we can listen to music in. So, and I think one of those layers is the artist brand. And I think as a kind of to try to bring this home a little bit for you all of our listeners, is when you're producing music, be aware of what your brand is on both fronts of your public, like social media brand, and then also your music brand. They should align. If they're not aligned, if you're talking about like, I don't know, some crazy conspiracy theories on your social media accounts, but you're talking about, breakup songs over here, those aren't aligned. And so you need to change one or the other. You either need to write about conspiracy theories, or you need to start talking about breakup, experiences, or, heartache or something like that. Right. Or something that's, is somewhat closer aligned to your music. And so you have to have those aligned. Otherwise, people inherently will follow you on social media for conspiracy theories. They'll listen to your music, but those aren't going to be the same people. They're going to be different people, because different people are interested in different things.
Yes.
And so there's very few people who are going to, engage with you on both fronts. And this is why you see a ton of, influencers on social media with massive followings, but they have zero traction on their Spotify. It's because their brands don't align.
Yeah.
Or their brand on social media has nothing to do with music, so people don't even know they make music. So that's also another major issue that we run into while working with artists, because some artists will come in, they're like, I have like 10,000 followers on Instagram, like blow me up. And I'm like, I can't, because your brand on social media isn't musical. People don't follow you for music. They don't care that you're a musician. They care about, your cat videos and the fact that you make jokes about, Chick-fil-A.
Dude, that's such a good point. Like I've heard it said like your vibe attracts your tribe, and like I think that's so important. So like just tactically some takeaways, right? Like you're saying like identify these core things, these principles, that you want to share. And especially if you have an audience and you're trying to go public, the public route of, getting after it with some music stuff, then that's you kind of got to repeat those, like rinse and repeat, like keep those things out there, because in a way, I don't know, I've run into this with some like fellow artists who have built a following by, remixing a lot of tracks or always covering songs. And sometimes it doesn't translate to their own personal artist projects, because people are like, oh no, you're the guy that covers the, like, I'm just waiting for my favorite artist to drop their song and see what you do with it. And it's like, in a way, you just kind of got to reverse engineer and think about, like, because you kind of teach people how to treat you, I think in a lot of ways. And so whatever presence you're putting out there, whatever perception you're putting out there online and through your music, it's gonna attract a certain kind of audience, ideally, right? And like, you would want those things to be aligned, like you said. Like, on your social media profile, you have a whole bunch of followers, but it's because you post memes of old people or something, And then it's like your music, you're actually talking about, the government or who knows, just something that's totally not aligned. So I think that's like super tactical. If you're like wondering, okay, what do I do? Like, how do I be authentic? Start by just like identifying some core things, and then like emphasize and reiterate those things. And I want to pass it back to you, Tyson, but I would say from the writing perspective, how do I be authentic and stuff? Like, you just don't overthink it. Just don't overthink it. Just write. Just write. And if you can, write consistently. If you have the margin, write daily and just talk about where you're at. Talk about something you felt. Talk about what you're noticing. Talk about a relationship in your life that actually isn't yours. Talk about your sister and the person that she just, like found or whatever, and talking about that. Like, you can still write about authentic things, even if it's not specifically your relationship or your story, because you can comment on people that are close to you and what they're going through and how you're feeling about that. The whole point with writing and authenticity, just don't overthink it. Just write. Just be you. Use your vocab, all that good stuff. But Tyson, with like any parting tips for tactically, what to do with this information and this conversation of authenticity when it comes to brand, when it comes to writing, anything that you can think of?
So this whole conversation goes really deep. And so I want to remind you real quick of just what brand is, right? It's the things that you associate the unknown with the known. So you are the unknown, and whatever you want to associate yourself with is the known thing. So make sure that you're being intentional about what that known thing is that you're sharing about, whether that's, music from other artists to closer align yourself with other artists. If it's other interests that you have, those are also all great things. Again, just because you want to be a certain way, if you're not, though, like, that is where inauthenticity rears its head. If you want to be associated with 21 Pilots, but you have nothing in, common with them musically, it's probably not a good move for your brand to try to build that association. Yeah. So just be really careful about where you're treading. And then also make sure that you're, as Nathan said, you reiterate everything about your brand all the time, because people make the mistake of thinking, I have already said this, I don't need to say it again. But in reality, it takes a long time for your entire audience to hear a message once. But in reality, people need to hear a message 7 times before they actually even remember that message. So that's been well studied. The original study that figured that part out was I think it was a Ford or one of the car brands. They figured out, they're like, oh, people need to see this 7 times before they even recognize that it's a thing. Yeah. So make sure that you're reiterating your message, and on an average organic reach of 10% of your audience, that means that you need to repeat it 70 times before your entire audience has seen it 7 times each. So
whoa,
that changes the kind of frame that we probably view things in. It's like, if I share one story about one value that I have, I probably need to share that same story 70 times in different ways for my entire audience to see it. So find out those core things that you and your audience really care about. Or if you don't have an audience, just find the things that you really care about and you like talking about and you're okay talking about 70 times, and then just talk about it 70 times and repeat it over and over and over. It's okay. People get really scared of like fan burnout of like, oh, that you just get the same thing from me. And that can happen if it's boring. But if it's not boring, then people will love it. For example, you like your favorite song, you probably have listened to it hundreds of times, but you're still not bored of it because it's good. And that's the level of, content storytelling that we want to have with all of our artists, because that is ultimately what creates a strong and consistent brand that people will follow for the long term. So hopefully that makes sense, and you can actually go out and implement that today. So find out, what are you interested in? How does that align with your music? And then go ahead and make content about that thing, whether it's entertainment or just stories about that concept. And then go ahead and start posting that a lot. And don't be afraid to repeat yourself again and again.
Love it. And keep that songwriting simple. Don't overthink it. And if you want some help there, I've got a free guide I'd love to hand your way. If you go to finishsongsguide.com, it's going to help you. It's going to help you walk through a 5-step process to take a song from scratch, from ground zero, all the way to finished, while helping you specifically not overthink the lyrical process, the melodic process, and just getting the song done, and just being able to write from where you are and practice the process of just actually being authentic, not being overly authentic or not being inauthentic, just being in that sweet spot, right? Goldilocks, the 3 bears, being just right where you should be for who you are as an artist and the kind of vibe that you want to put out there to attract your tribe. So if you want to help with the songwriting process, it's totally free. It's just 10 pages, and pull it up on your phone. And next time you're cracking open your DAW or picking up your guitar or piano, or picking up your piano, wow, you're like Hulk if you do that. But sitting down at your piano, you can go to finishsongsguide.com. That's there for you. It's all yours. And we would really appreciate too, hey, just leave us a review, leave us a comment if you're watching here on YouTube. Just let us know what you think of this conversation. This is kind of like, this is a whole thing. And this could potentially be like its own 3-part, 4-part series, because authenticity is such a deep, nuanced kind of topic here. So if there's anything that resonated with you, anything that we could clarify, would you please just let us know? And also let us know if there's anything else that we could cover that maybe this conversation sparked for you. We'd love to do that as well. So until next time, keep creating, keep making songs, keep pursuing this music stuff, because it matters. You know it does. So see it through. We'll see you next episode.